Before the Dreaming, Chapter 4, The First Thread. Kel's fingers hovered above the smooth surface of the pod. Trembling slightly, he was aware of the hush that had fallen over the square. The hum beneath his palm had deepened. It was subtle, yet insistent, like the heartbeat of something immense that was watching. He could feel the lattice stir in response to his presence. Fragile electric threads were reaching outward, brushing against fragments of memory and echoes of lives long past. Mira's hand brushed his lightly. "Together," she whispered, her voice steady, anchoring him. Kel nodded, his heart racing, and he stepped closer. The square seemed to expand and contract, the crowd fading into soft shapes at the edges of his perception. The pods pulsed in uneven rhythms, some quick and bright, some slow and hesitant, as though each had its own mind, its own history, waiting to respond to the ones who dared to notice. Kel's vision shimmered at the edges, as threads of past and future intertwined. He sensed the lattice, not distant, not abstract, but alive. It was conscious, waiting for engagement. The stranger from the edge of the square watched him quietly, eyes like steel. "Do not touch yet," he said, voice low, carried on the hum itself. "The first lessons are not in touching, but in perceiving. See the threads, listen to them. Understand before you act." Kel swallowed. He could feel it already, the pull and the subtle tug of connection. The lattice probing gently, inviting him to recognize it, to step fully into its rhythm. Mira mirrored his focus, her gaze fixed on the nearest pod, aware of the hum, of the pulse, and the delicate lines of light beginning to shimmer faintly across the surfaces. The world around them held its breath. The first thread awaited. Kel breathed slowly, forcing his awareness outward, letting the threads brush against his senses. He could feel tiny currents of motion, pulses of memory or thought from those who had approached the pods before him. Some threads vibrated with warmth, others with a chill that made his skin prickle. Each one carried fragments of laughter, fear, longing, and decisions made long ago. Mira's gaze shifted from pod to pod, as if she could sense the lattice in ways Kel could not yet name. "Do you feel that?" she murmured. Her voice was low, almost swallowed by the hum, but still precise. Kel nodded. Every pod seemed alive, to be aware of them. A faint shimmer appeared across Kel's vision, threads of color stretching outward like spiderwebs glinting in morning light. A slow, deliberate thread was pulling him toward a pod near the far edge of the circle. Its hum was hesitant but insistent. A quiet invitation. The stranger's eyes followed him. "Notice the rhythm," he said. "Do not force it, do not chase it. Let it choose you." Kel exhaled, his heart hammering. He tried to relax, letting the lattice flow through perception rather than touch. The threads moved around him like water, fragile yet relentless. A flicker of light traced along one strand, rising from the pod to him, brushing his arm and leaving a sensation not of heat or pressure, but of recognition. He looked at Mira. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated and reflecting the shimmer across the square. She took a small step closer to him, and the thread that had touched him stretched, looping around her too. The lattice was learning, adjusting, and sensing their combined presence. Kel's fingers twitched. But he remembered the stranger's warning. Not yet. He focused instead on seeing, tracing the way the threads bent, twisted, and pulsed with meaning. A whisper of insight tickled his mind, a memory that was not his own but felt intimately familiar. The pods respond to those who reach. The stranger's voice carried again. To those who notice, to those who dare to see. Kel felt a surge of both exhilaration and fear. To see and to truly perceive was more than observation, it was engagement. The lattice was alive, conscious, and it had chosen to notice them. Before the Dreaming, Chapter 5, Into the Lattice. Kel glanced at Mira. Her hand hovered near his, their fingers brushing lightly, as if a silent promise of shared courage. The hum of the pods had deepened. It was resonant now, as if acknowledging their readiness. One pod, larger and darker than the rest, pulsed with a steady rhythm at the center of the circle. Its surface shimmered faintly, seemingly liquid in its movement, but inviting yet patient. "Together?" Mira whispered again. Kel nodded. Their steps were slow and deliberate, the world narrowing to the space between themselves and the pod. The crowd around them became a blur of gray shapes. The squares hum fading into a single note, a steady pulse that matched their own heartbeats. As they reached the pod, Cale felt the lattice vibrate beneath his skin. Threads of memory and awareness began brushing against him and tangling with fragments of Myra's presence. He inhaled sharply, then exhaled, letting the sensation flow through him rather than resist it. The stranger watched from the edge of the circle, arms folded, eyes calm. Step inside, do not rush. Feel, do not act. Cale and Mira stepped together, their feet entering the smooth interior. The hum intensified immediately, surrounding them and pressing gently against their awareness. Light curved around them, and threads of memory and possibility weaving through their vision. Shapes, colors, and sensations that should not have existed in the real world filled the pod, and yet they felt unmistakably real. Cale reached out instinctively, but Mira's hand gripped his lightly. Not yet, she murmured. They stood still, letting the pod's rhythm wash over them, a shared consciousness brushing against their minds. The lattice recognized them now, but not as separate beings, but as a pair, threading themselves into the web. A voice, neither fully human nor machine, whispered across the pod's hum. You are here, you have arrived. The lattice remembers, and it will teach those who see together. Cale's breath caught. The pod was no longer just a vessel. It was a threshold. It was a living conduit into something larger than either of them could yet imagine. And they had stepped across it, together. The pod's interior was quiet, but yet alive. Light curved and bent in impossible angles, shimmering across surfaces that seemed both solid and fluid. Cale felt the threads pressing gently against his mind, tugging at fragments of memory, of thought, of possibility. Mira's presence beside him anchored the experience. Her calm steadied him against the vertigo of perception. Do you see it? Cale whispered, his voice almost swallowed by the hum. I do, Mira replied, eyes wide, her pupils reflecting the web of threads surrounding them. It's everything and nothing at once, she said. The threads shifted as they watched, twisting, splitting, and looping back on themselves. Some carried voices, the soft whispers of past users. Others were empty but pulsing with pure potential. Cale reached out mentally. He was sensing without touching. He was feeling the lattice brush against him, rather than forcing contact. A faint shimmer traced across his vision. It was a single golden thread threading directly toward him. Mira mirrored the movement, and the thread split, wrapping around them both. A fragile bridge of shared perception. They felt it vibrate. It was almost like a heartbeat. It was acknowledging their presence, testing their attention. The stranger's voice echoed in their minds now, calm but insistent. Perceive first, engage second. The lattice teaches those who listen. Cale closed his eyes, letting the sensations flow through him. Memories, possibilities, and fragments of lives long past intertwined with his own awareness. Mira's thread pulsed in harmony with his, their thoughts aligning without effort. They were learning to see together. They were learning to thread themselves into the lattice safely and to become part of its living memory. A sudden ripple of light darted across the pod. It was catching both their attention. The lattice was responding, not just to Cale or Mira individually, but to the combined presence of their curiosity, caution, and wonder. It was a delicate negotiation. A first lesson: to move too fast or act without thought could fracture the connection. But if they observed, if they noticed, the lattice would open further to revealing more. Cale exhaled, a mixture of fear and exhilaration flooding him. It's alive, he murmured. Yes, Myra breathed, and it's aware of us. For the first time, Cale understood that they had not entered a pod, but they had stepped into a living web of consciousness. And every choice, every perception, would ripple outward, threading them deeper into the lattice, and to whatever lay beyond. Cale shifted slightly, letting his awareness expand, and reaching out along the golden thread that connected him and Mira. The lattice pulsed in response. A subtle wave that ran through the pod. It was vibrating softly against their skin and minds. Shapes and colors began to solidify, threads coalescing into faint outlines of figures, places, and moments that were not their own but yet somehow familiar. Mira's hand brushed his again. It was a grounding touch, and together they leaned into the pulse. The lattice responded, curling around them like a living web. Cale glimpsed a vision. It was a street much like the one outside. It was bustling with people long gone, their movements etched in delicate lines of light. It flickered and shifted, and he realized these were echoes of the past, memories stored within the lattice itself. "Can you see it?" he asked, voice trembling with awe. Yes, Myra said, her eyes wide, reflecting overlapping images. "It's like we're inside someone else's memory, but it's not fixed. It's alive. It changes with us." A soft hum intensified in the pod, rising and falling like a breath. Kyle felt a thread tug sharply, guiding him toward another vision, this one darker, more uncertain. Shadows moved along the edges of a city street. Indistinct figures everywhere hunched and wary. The lattice was showing them not only memory, but consequence. The choices made by others that had rippled outward and shaping events in ways long forgotten. The golden thread between Kyle and Myra pulsed faster, strengthening their connection. Each time their awareness aligned, the visions became clearer and more coherent. It was as if the lattice recognized collaboration, attention, and shared perception. The stranger's voice echoed faintly, as if carried by the lattice itself. "Do not grasp, observe. The lattice rewards those who see without forcing, who thread themselves with care." Kyle exhaled slowly. "It's teaching us," he said. "But what exactly?" Mira's eyes flickered toward a branching thread that were shimmering faintly. "I think it wants us to understand relationships. Between actions, between people, between moments. To see the threads connecting everything." Cale followed her gaze, and the lattice responded, sending delicate lines of light stretching outward. It was linking one memory to another, and one decision to countless outcomes. It was intricate, fragile, and alive. An endless web of cause, effect, and perception. For the first time, Cale felt the weight of the lattice's awareness, and the responsibility that came with seeing. They had stepped inside, yes, but now they were no longer merely observers. They were participants. They were threads themselves, woven into something far larger than either of them had imagined. Before the dreaming, Chapter 6. Entering the dreaming. The hum of the pod swelled around them. It was no longer subtle, no longer just a pulse. It became a tide, wrapping them in its rhythm and pulling them inward. Kel's chest tightened as the lattice stretched. Threads brushing against every thought, brushing against every memory, brushing against every hidden corner of awareness. He felt the edges of himself dissolve, not entirely, but enough that the world outside, the square, the ruined streets, and the waiting crowd all faded into distant shapes. Mira's hand found his, grounding him, and steadying him, even as the pod seemed to breathe with a life of its own. "Are you ready?" she whispered, her voice both tremulous and steady. Cale nodded, even though the nod felt unnecessary. The lattice had already claimed them, and there was no turning back. The interior of the pod shifted. Light was folding into itself. Colors were spiraling and unfolding in impossible geometries. Threads of past and future, memory and possibility, coiled around them like living vines. Cale felt himself lifted almost weightless, yet tethered. Every nerve and thought resonating with the lattice. A whisper, faint but insistent, brushed against his mind. It said, "Welcome, you have arrived." He gasped, blinking that the dreaming was not a place. It was not a time. It was a state, a web, and a consciousness. Cale and Mira were no longer merely perceiving. They were part of it. Their threads woven into the lattice's vast, trembling network and effort pulse. Every shimmer of light, every flicker of color carried meaning. Cale's eyes widened as visions began to bloom around them. They saw cities unbuilt and streets that never existed. People moved in patterns that defied logic, and yet felt intimate and inevitable. Mira leaned close, her breath brushing his shoulder. Cale realized she was seeing differently but in sync with his, seeing threads overlapping, harmonizing, a duet of perception. This is the dreaming," he whispered. His voice seemed to ripple. It seemed to be refracting through the threads, and becoming both part of the lattice and separate, a new kind of presence. The stranger's voice, now echoing from somewhere inside the lattice itself, carried weight and authority. You have entered what is remembered and what is imagined. Here, the threads are endless. Here, what you perceive shapes what exists. Step carefully, see clearly, and remember, the dreaming is alive, and it watches all who enter. Kale exhaled a mixture of awe and fear flooding him. He glanced at Mira. She smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the impossible geometries spiraling around them. Together, they had crossed the threshold, not just into a pod, not just into a lattice, but into a living, breathing, dreaming. And it had begun to respond. The dreaming pulsed around them. It was a vast network of light, color, and sensation. Kale reached out with his mind first, feeling threads extending in every direction. Some were thick and steady, others fragile and quivering, as if unsure whether to support him. Each thread carried a story, a memory, a possibility, and a decision long past or yet to come. Mira's presence beside him was a tether, a gentle reassurance. Her awareness intertwined with his, and together they traced a glowing strand, stretching toward a flicker of motion. It coiled around them, guiding them deeper. The further they moved, the more the dreaming responded. Its colors brightened, threads aligned, and faint whispers of voices murmured in their minds. Kale reached a junction where multiple threads converged. It was a web of choices and outcomes spinning outward like ripples on water. He could sense echoes of people they had never met, and cities that had never existed. Lives that had ended before they began. Each thread was alive, pulsing with potential. Which one do we follow? Mira asked, voice quiet but steady. Kale hesitated. The one that feels like it's waiting for us, he said finally. The lattice seemed to acknowledge the choice, and was shimmering in response. A single golden thread extended toward them, weaving through the chaos like a guide. As they moved along it, Kale felt the first lesson of the dreaming. Perception shapes reality. The longer they followed consciously, observing without forcing, the clearer the threads became. Shapes and figures emerged, some familiar, some alien, but each one carrying its own story. A child's laughter echoed through a fragment of a city street. A single candle burned in a distant room that never existed. A sudden ripple startled them. The thread quivered, pulsing sharply, almost like a warning. Kyle felt a shadow of unease, but Mira's hand gripped his. Together, they adjusted, and breathing slowly, they aligning their awareness with the thread instead of resisting it. Voices, faint and layered, whispered through the lattice. Notice, listen, understand. Kale realized the dreaming was testing them, not threatening but probing. Every thought, every hesitation, every impulse was sensed, acknowledged, and responded to. They were not passive observers. They were participants, shaping the flow of the lattice by simply being aware. And then a figure appeared ahead, hazy and shifting. A silhouette both human and impossible. The golden thread pulsed toward it, as if urging them to follow. Kyle exhaled, glancing at Mira. Shall we? She nodded, eyes wide, pupils reflecting the web of the dreaming. Together, step by step, they advanced, deeper into the lattice. The threads wrapping gently around them, pulling them toward the unknown and toward whatever the dreaming had waiting.